The role of the Supreme Court in an era of near unprecedented political division. Well, I sat down with Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett to discuss how she tunes out the court of public opinion and about her new book, Listening to the Law. Justice Barrett, great to have you with us on Fox News Sunday. Thanks for coming by.
It's great to be here, Shannon.
I really enjoyed the book. I felt at times I was back in law school, which I think is a good thing. You could definitely see your heart as a professor, as somebody who really wants to teach and make sure that people understand. And you do a lot of work in this book trying to make people understand what the court actually does and doesn't do. Have you ever had a level of frustration that people don't really understand what justices do?
Yes, I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book. I felt like I wanted to explain the court. People ask the same questions, and I think people have the same questions. That people don't know what's going on in the court. And I love the court. I wanted to welcome people into it and introduce them to it.
Well, there's a lot of great information that I think any layperson or lawyer is going to learn new things about the court and the inner workings and how it actually plays out from start to finish with these cases. But before you took the job, you write about the decision that your family made together. And you write in here, you say, I just watched Brett Kavanaugh, whom I knew and respected, undergo a brutal confirmation process, and I was afraid of what I might face, yet it seemed cowardly to bow out because we didn't want to make the sacrifice. You talk about your husband, Jesse, said, if we do this, we got to burn the ships. There's no turning back. Has it ever felt too costly a choice for you?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a sacrifice, but, you know, I'm honored to serve the country. We've never considered undoing the choice, and we don't regret it.
Well, you do talk about having to develop a thicker skin than you already had walking into this. You say about justices, you want people to understand, because you had, I think it was a relative who came to you and said, why don't you guys just decide what's right and wrong? Why don't you do that? And you talk about that's not exactly the role. You said of justices, they're referees, not kings, because they decide whether people have played by the rules rather than what the rules should be. And you write later in the book, whatever the court decides, it makes enemies. So how do you deal with the noise, left and right, that you get?
I tune it out. My husband, Jesse, we joke around that, you know, he's my gatekeeper. I just tell him I only want to know what is said about me in the news on a need-to-know basis. If I absolutely need to know, then my assistant or my husband will tell me. But otherwise, whether it's good or bad, I just try not to pay attention to it because that just gets in the way of focusing on deciding cases.
So about Jesse, it's interesting, you talk about, you both have had such demanding careers, you as a professor, him as a prosecutor, in different practices and facets of the law. You got 7 kids, and you talk about how there's never been really a dividing line. They've been in your classrooms, in your offices, they've been in his courtroom, and you've kind of married these things together. I love the story where they enjoyed his work so much as a federal prosecutor that the kids started drafting indictments against each other because they now know how to do this. How did the two of you balance 2 really demanding careers and 7 children?
You know, my husband is great. He does far more than his fair share. You know, the kids have gotten used to it. And when we lived in South Bend, it's a really livable town. It's a great place to raise kids because everything was a short commute. So I was able to be at work and then pop over to the kids' school, get there in, you know, 7 minutes, do something in the classroom, go back to campus. So it made it easy to blend things. And they're a little bit older now. I mean, we have 4 who are still in high school and middle school. But I think we couldn't have raised all 7 in our current jobs living in Washington, where there's a lot more traffic.
There is. How did those indictments go? Do the kids, did they get into fully prosecuting cases against their siblings?
I was going to say they fortunately or unfortunately never made it to trial.
Okay. So I want to ask about this. There's been a lot of talk over the years. The makeup of the court has changed. It's been at 9 for a very, very long time, more than a century. But there are, in recent years, more conversations about changing term limits or adding to the court. I want to play something that former Attorney General Eric Holder said about that a couple of days ago.
People shouldn't be on the Supreme Court for 30, 40 years, become disconnected from the country that they're supposed to serve. 18 years is enough for anybody to serve on the Supreme Court, and that has huge support.
So you write in the book, the Constitution's guarantees of life tenure and salary protection for federal judges are designed to fortify a judge's resolve to stand firm against the tide of public opinion. So what do you make of this public conversation of some fundamental changes to the way the court works?
Well, some fundamental changes are set by the Constitution. I mean, Article 3, any change either has to be consistent with the Constitution or come by way of constitutional amendment. But the fundamental proposition that judges should not be able to be fired for their decisions, I think, is the most essential part of the hardwiring of judicial independence into the Constitution itself, because if judges could be fired for their decisions, then they would not be able to stand firm against the tide of public opinion or, the displeasure of the other branches.
Mm-hmm. You also talk about really tough conversations in the book. And that's obviously something our country is reeling from, political violence and real disagreements that have crossed the line into life and death situations. So are you hopeful that we'll find a way back to having really tough conversations?
I am really hopeful, because I feel like when I talk to people are not happy with the level of polarization in the country and the inability of people to have conversations with those whom they disagree with. And so I guess my hope is that we are at a turning point in a corner where more people want to know how to have those conversations.
And you have to have them at the court. You talk about being very collegial, but there are sometimes that publicly there's a little bit of sparring. Yeah. And there's been much made of the emergency docket, so people understand you don't get full briefing and oral arguments, but you have to make a temporary decision on something. And there have been some really heated dissents from those who are on the losing end of some of those decisions. One of them, from Justice Sotomayor, joined by Justices Kagan and Jackson, said, in the last 8 months, this court's appetite to circumvent the ordinary appellate process and weigh in on important issues has grown exponentially. Its interest in explaining itself, unfortunately, has not. So what about her criticism that there's not full transparency on that, whether you want to call it emergency docket, shadow docket, interim docket?
Yes, we can't decide what to call it. It seems it's a relatively new phenomenon, or at least the amount of activity on it is relatively new. These are cases that are preliminary, and so they are not cases in which the court has had full briefing and made a final judgment. And I talk in the book about the opinion writing process. Deciding a merits case is a painstaking process. It's slow. It takes a lot of work. And when we write an opinion, it reflects our final judgment. On the interim docket, these preliminary decisions that we make, it's not just about the merits, whether a case is right or wrong. We can account for other factors as well. And if we wrote a long opinion, it might give the impression that we have finally resolved the issue. And in none of these cases have we finally resolved the issue.
We're tracking all of them. Quick final question. It's hard for me to believe it's been 5 years, essentially, that you've been on the court.
Yes.
But everybody remembers, I think, if they were following the confirmation, the process in which you held up the notepad and you were asked, what's on it? And here's the moment. And you said, essentially, it's the letterhead of the U.S. Senate. We want to know if you kept the notepad or where it is now.
Some very kind staffers snatched it up from the table, and after I was confirmed, brought it over to me at the court, and so I have it on display in my chambers in a shadow box.
Okay. Justice Barrett, thank you very much. I think the book is just a fascinating discussion of what happens at the court, what its role really is, and I think it'll be very helpful for anybody who wants to know more about how the court works.
Thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.